It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our first presenter. He's a professor at a university in California, San Francisco, California Institute of Integral Studies. We started reading Montuori in 2005, and ever since we've been inspired by his work and his articles. And he's a scholar, and people is coming out to this specific choice here. Really a scholar. But he's also a very friendly guy, and we had a chance to visit him some years ago, and we've been spending a few days with him. And he's a very friendly guy, and he's also a funny guy. And he's interested in, so to speak, all these of. I tried. Could somebody turn up the volume? So he's interested in, so to speak, all aspects of like soccer, dessert, UFOs, and all that kind of stuff. And his mind is kind of weird and wicked, and he has some funny twists on different aspects. And maybe that's why he is so interested in the concept of creativity. How can we exceed the dominant understandings and develop new ways of living together? So please welcome Professor Alfonso Montuori.
Can you hear me?
Hey, Marshall, I understand English. It's amazing. Actually, truth is, it's my fourth language. So I grew up speaking Italian and Dutch, and then learned Greek, and then here we're in England, so I had to learn CD, and that's what I'm stuck with now. But thank you so much for your very generous introduction, and for have a big head. This thing keeps moving on. I'm not all set. And for your great hospitality, and for the pleasure and privilege to be able to come to Denmark for the first time and hang out with so many wonderful people. I will be speaking about creativity today, and I want to speak about how our understanding of creativity transitioned, if you will, from a reductionist approach to a more systemic approach, and what the implications are. So we had a very important discussion about structure yesterday, and my general inability to structure myself and just to want to go on and yak away. So I've actually taken some notes about what I'm going to say, which, was thanks to a therapeutic intervention by either I have a big head or this thing is small, but probably it's both. So when we think about creativity, especially after living in America for so many years, I like to think big, right? But really, when you think about words like creator, right? God is the creator in religious traditions, right? We talk about human beings and animals as creatures, right? So products of creation. And creation itself is a word deeply connected to the idea of creativity. So creativity, I think, sometimes gets a little trivialized, just in the sense of, well, they get a quick idea. But I think it's a far more complex, interesting, and important topic than just having a great new idea for products to sell, right? So a little bit of my own background. I as you probably figured out, I grew up living in a number of different countries. My father worked for the Italian government. And when I moved to London in the 70s, I started playing in bands, and making recordings and touring around the country and so on. And I've pretty much thought I was going to be a musician, but then I realized that I'm really an introvert. And the idea of spending so much time with 5 other guys on a bus, rehearsing, hearing the same jokes, doing the same stupid things, I thought this is not to me. I love music, but this band thing is too much for me. And so I decided to make a complete break and go to the United States. And my other love was the world of ideas, and is the world of ideas. And so I thought, well, what does the research have to say about bands, about created groups, and why they wake up, and why bands only last 3 or 4 years, and then it was biting. And there was nothing there. There was no research on that. There was no research on R&D labs. There was no research on how to make a move, on what's involved in a movie. It was only Fellini, Armand. Of course, as an Italian, I have to put out these Italian names, right? But it was the names of the famous people, and a band too was always associated with one person. There wasn't a sense that there was anything else going on, even though Giorgio Armani didn't actually design and make all the clothes himself. We know this, but that was swept under the carpet because the creativity just always came from one person. When I would tell people that I was interested in sort of the more social aspects of creativity, in the US, they said that's an oxymoron. There is no social aspect of creativity. And if you would say, well, if you look at great musical partnerships, George and Ira Gershwin or John Lennon and Paul McCartney, they would say, well, they needed 2 people to write one song. This person wrote songs on his own and therefore had to be better somehow. So there was a real, particularly in the United States, a very strong cultural resistance to the idea of collaboration and collaborative creativity. And that's not surprising because, as I think we all know, the United States is the most individualistic country in the world, right? It's the unit of analysis, as we say in social science, is definitely the individual. Everything is about the individual. You remember those old TV series, the lone cowboy. You had the lone private investigator who would go solve crimes and stuff. It was always one person against the masses, right? Against the bad guys, and which seems to be repeating itself, although, let me not get into that too much. So there was this block, and as I mentioned in a previous session, when I wrote an article with a very pretentious title, I just got my PhD. I wrote this article called "Deconstructing the Lone Genius Theory." Right? It's just saying that the lone genius idea was sucking all the air out of the room and not paying enough attention to everything else that was going on. So at these conferences, they called me a communist, right? Because I tech skills. So, and I mean, so what I found so interesting is that this issue had so many different ramifications and so many roots, even in the culture and the cultural mindset, right, of how people approach things. And I know any number of really interesting systems thinkers have been Americans, but you can be pretty sure they're out of print. One of the things that happened a while back is that I was looking, this is the early 90s, I was looking for copies of Gregory Bateson's books. They were all out of fear. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody cared about who he was. He was pretty much forgotten. Not true in Italy, where there were Bateson circles and there were books about Bateson and Steps to an Ecology of Mind is an audio book, right? Completely different world. In France as well, he's considered one of the great thinkers of the 20th century. In the US, pretty much forgotten. In general, Americans are not particularly interested in the relational, the systemic. And again, it's also connected to sort of a political mindset, hence the communist cause, right? Because they think that the individual is king and everything else smacks of socialism or communism, or that's what they do, right? So it was very interesting to see how, ironically, everything was, all these ideas were systemically connected in the minds of the Americans too, right? So that they had these connections between the politics and between the academic side, between their own understanding of themselves and so on. So when I started looking at the creativity research, in those days it was broken down in person, process, and product, right? What's the creative product? What is or isn't creative? What's the creative process? And what's the creative? What do we know about the creative person? And there was really some amazing research that was done, particularly at a place called the Institute of Personality Assessment and Research at Berkeley. And that's where my friend and mentor, Frank Barron, worked. And they interviewed all these great novelists and mathematicians and poets and really brought them in for 3 days to actually stay over there. And they watched them eat breakfast and they watched them talk and they gave them this battery of psychological tests, Truman Capote, I mean, all these different interesting people, and you can actually now look at that material and find out, what Truman Capote's scores were on MMPI, right? And also famous architects. There was a huge study of architects that was really fascinating. But there were also limitations, because when you say PPP, person, process, product, you're saying person, you're saying that what we're studying is the individual, right? It's not persons, right? It's not groups, it's not organizations, it's persons. And in fact, that's what people were studying. They were just studying individual persons. And again, I don't deny the importance of doing that. I think it's fascinating. There's lots of really great stuff that's come out, but there is more, right? And by not addressing the other material, I think a lot is missed and it's very problematic. So there was nothing relational, nothing contextual. So that also created a series of myths, one of them being that if you're creative, no matter what the context is, political, economic, and social, you will shine and you will come through, right? And conveniently, the vast majority of the people who did come through were white men. I wonder why, but that was obviously there was no consideration of what the contextual factors were. This whole mythology, which was then also replicated or encouraged, if you will, in the movies, right? This person is poor and they're playing in the street, but like, oh, somebody here took us, oh, you're brilliant, who'll take you? And 5 days later, they're on television and super famous. Because creativity comes through and shines through and so on. Also, this idea of genius without learning became a big deal, right? So that if you're a genius, you don't really have to practice like normal people do. You just pick up the guitar and whoa, you're fantastic because it's a gift from God or whoever you want to say is generous. And that's also problematic because it's a very disempowering because a lot of people then pick up an instrument and they go, hey, and they go, oh, wow, I don't have the gifts like so-and-so, What we should also be aware of is the saying, don't let them see you sweat, right? Are you familiar with that? In other words, don't let people see that what you're doing is difficult for you, right? It goes back to the Italian sprezzatura. It's like, oh yeah, sure, I can do this, but never let people know that you worked really hard for it, right? Because it has to seem like it's just natural for you. And you have the same thing in songwriting. If I say, I woke up and I remember my dream and there was this beautiful melody and I immediately wrote it down even before I had coffee. And now it's this wonderful song, which is in fact the story Paul McCartney told about yesterday. That's sexy. That's like very cool. It's like, wow, he's a genius. What you don't know is that the other part of the song, he recycled from a song that he'd been working on earlier. So the song is that, so he did have this dream and there was a melody there, but to actually complete the song, he spent another, it's like 6 months of it and thought, what can I do in this place of the song? But he borrowed something from something else that he'd written, which is not that sexy, sort of recycling of old material, right? So the point is the understanding of creativity kind of became mythologized, but also trivialized in a way. So that I think is very disappointing. But what also happened then is we didn't know anything about bands. We didn't know anything about R&D labs. We didn't know anything about how movies are made, how innovation in business works. I remember I spent many years was consulting in Silicon Valley about innovation, and they didn't want to use the word creativity. They want the word innovation because they associated creativity with like slightly crazy, nutty individuals. So people would stop talking about creativity, just innovation. Innovation, that's good. Seems like that could be methodical and somehow, more effective in that sense. And so a systemic view, which took a while to emerge and be accepted, really changes things around because it sees the individual obviously not as isolated, but in a continuous relationship, continuously influenced by other people. And again, there's that mythology of, so-and-so came about ex nihilo, this miraculous new idea came out without any predecessors. And that, now, of course, everything has a history, everything has a context, everything has a predecessor. But again, it's more appealing and frankly easier to sell if it seems like, oh yeah, sure, this is completely new, and particularly for people who don't do their due diligence and study the history, they don't know that maybe, in fact, it's a recycled idea, right? So a systemic view, first of all, saw the individual more relationally and more contextually and realized that the context does make a difference and that there are contexts that support creativity and there are contexts that kill creativity. I'm sure we've all been in some contexts that are just not favorable for creativity, right? Even when we're learning a new language, certainly my experience, I hope it hasn't been your experience, but maybe it has. that there's an instructor who, the minute you open your mouth to say something in the new language, shuts you up because they tell you it's wrong because you're mispronouncing, right? And you start doing that enough times, at a certain point you go, screw it, I'm never going to say anything again. Right? I mean, why would you? Because the person isn't given a chance to just at least get some fluency going, just get the thing going. You're immediately cut off. That's the way it is with creativity too. One of the larger problems there is that both in industry and in academia, certainly in academia, people believe that they show how smart they are by being critical of other people. So if you have an idea and you want to try it out, I go, oh no, that's never going to work. And let me tell you exactly why that's never going to work. But that's really unhelpful, because in the beginning, in the beginning, new ideas are a little fragile or uncertain. We don't really know what it is, but we have some kind of intuition that there might be something, right? And of course, there's all this tacit knowledge that we have. Intuition really, at least one form of it, is just tacit knowledge that we have, that we draw not necessarily consciously, but it so gradually becomes conscious, right? But then if someone just immediately slaps you down, it's going to be all over. So, and it's also the case if you say, well, yes, that we need this initial openness. A lot of people say, yes, but we have to be critical. And the thing is, it's both and. At a certain point, we have to test, we have to be critical, we have to look at it and say, okay, if we're going to spend more time on this, let's look at it and really test it before we spend more time. But unfortunately, the tendency also has been to have this overcritical mindset. Related to this is one of the interesting aspects of what we found in the creativity research, that throughout person, process, product, it's paradoxical, right? So creative people are both, the creative personality, both more orderly and disorderly. So there's all of these sort of dialectics going on, right? Both more emotional and more rational, both more exploratory, but oddly more conservative too. You see the same dynamics in groups, or again, you have these strange paradoxes where there'll be greater openness, but then, they'll be more critical too, or something like that. So one of the reasons I think the process of our creativity hasn't fully understood is because it is an odd phenomenon. It is sort of this system that has these paradoxical qualities that create this ongoing process of emergence, right? So it's been a real struggle to bring in these more contextual ideas, but interestingly enough, business has come to the rescue, because certainly in Silicon Valley, corporations thrive on innovation, so they have new things to sell you all the time, and so innovation is now very desirable. So they became interested in creativity. So how can we continuously keep changing? Whereas before, creativity was something that, no, we don't know what to do with it, it's a little laggy, let's just keep doing what we're doing. Now it's very much, how do we have new products? And one of the things that they realized is that this creativity happens relationally. If you want to go from the idea to an actual product, it's a system, right? The idea isn't enough on its own. It's a series of relationships that people engage in. to get it right at the end for the consumer. So that was that interestingly has sort of spread out into the world. So in a lot of different fields now, people are looking at creativity more systemically. And again, people will make bizarre statements. So, those kind of posters or T-shirts are all about productivity and some of them are associated with corporations. So one of the things that they love to say is there is no I in team. Right, so there is no letter I in team, but there is also no I, no me in team, right? Which completely misses sort of the paradoxical quality of creativity, because really what you're saying is everybody's just a robot. Right? Everybody keep quiet and everybody behave and just work for the team. But, if we know anything about music, if we know anything about sports, we know that, yes, everybody works for the team, or everybody works for the overall sound of the band. But you don't want to lose the individuality of the players. But that's one of the things that happens very often is this kind of polarized thinking. It's like, okay, now it's not about the individual, now it's all about the group, right? And that's sort of the kind of simplification that I'll also be talking about a little later. And one of the constant problems that you see, particularly in the U.S., with this kind of thinking where there's no awareness of the complexity of a phenomenon like creativity. And this also brings us sort of to a warning, because we all know about holism on one hand and reductionism on the other hand, and I very often see this in books on systems theory and so on, and says now it's not the part anymore, it's the whole. It's the whole that's important. It's not the part. It used to be the part in quote old paradigm. In the new paradigm, it's the whole. I think that's the same kind of there is no I in team to say, right? Because, again, what if we're talking about a whole that's made up of people? If the parts are not important, then, well, we're saying that the parts are not important, right? And that's a problem. That's a certain kind of holism that I think is much better thought of in a more complex sense. It is both the whole and part. We understand the value of the part, but it was Pascal who said, I cannot understand the part without understanding the whole, and the whole without understanding the part, right? So it's more complex, but it does justice to reality a lot more, right? And it doesn't create these polarizations. I think this is an appropriate moment to talk about slime. It's a terrific scientist by the name of Evelyn Fox Keller, who has also written a lot about feminism and science. She was trying to figure out how slime molds work. Because slime molds in winter are these kind of disgusting looking blobs. But then, I think in summer, they all split up. And so you have hundreds of vegan slime. And so, could you maybe translate what slime is? Make sure we has
Because I was thinking about that, but I think might be the leaking sign. Is that yeah. Yeah. Snarere med hjælp på lidt også. Just say information.
SLIME.
Det er sleep. Så er det jo bare sig. Og som om det er nissen, det der baby.
It's good to know, to be clear on, just in case. Think it's something else.
Us in the moment when you see
In wooded areas.
Yes, it says that the title, the translation says is sleep, but I think that we're talking about some sort of snails. It's down house.
Slush. Snails without the house.
big.
So everybody was trying to figure out, how the hell do slime do this? How do they like have this one body and then they break up into a whole bunch of bits or parts and then they get together again? So the general idea was there must be a boss slime, a slime boss, right? There must be a slime boss that controls what the slime do, right? And again, this is sort of related to what we were talking about in creativity and American individualism and so on. We borrowed concepts from our social lives to interpret phenomena in nature. And so here as well, every human organization has some boss. So they got the slime has to have a boss too, right? And they just couldn't find the damn boss. Boss was in hiding. They were like a mafia boss somewhere. And then Evelyn Fox Keller came and she drew on the work of Alan Turing. So we may have heard a great British scientist, sort of at the heart of the computer revolution, was basically assassinated because he was gay, but by the government that forced him to do all sorts of horrible cures. Anyway, it's a tragic story in England, but he was a genius, and she used some of his ideas and basically said they're self-organizing, right? And at the time, this was not a common idea. Right now, people talk about self-organizing systems and self-organizing teams and so on, but that's completely new. And so she published her article and she demonstrated it all very carefully, and nobody paid attention because everybody was looking for the boss, right? So it was always something like 20 years later that they finally realized, like, wow, yeah, there is no boss. They're just doing this all by themselves, right? Which really created this fascinating shift. And now if you look at, there's tons of material on self-organization in nature, and it's like a really big thing. But what's interesting for us particularly, it's also to be an example of nature's creativity, right? Because its self-organization also leads to a kind of emergence, right? And when you think of a music group, a band, the music is an emergent property of the interaction of the musicians, right? So the musicians interact, and from that interaction then comes of the individuals, comes the collective sound that we can think of as like a whole, if you will, but it's the result of the interaction of these musicians. Now, of course, I'm still madly in love with music and improvisation and so on. So I draw heavily on these musical metaphors. But what we find also is that here we can learn a lot from the whole notion of improvisation. So when musicians are improvising together, as I said, the sound that you and I hear is the result of the emergent property that's the result of the interaction of these musicians, right? And increasingly people have started looking at this phenomenon and saying, well, how does that apply to us talking in a group, Because ultimately, every time we open our mouths, we are all improvisers. We may at times be boring improvisers and kind of say the same things over and over, right? But we are making it up. It's like when you and I talk, there's probably a context of thought my talk was boring or something, right? But at least we're talking about, we have some guidelines, but fundamentally we're making it up, right? It's not, there's no pre-existing script that says this is exactly what we're going to say. So human beings actually improvise all the time. We may not be improvising in a musical context all the time, but we are improvising in our interactions. And this is one of the things that I want to stress about creativity. It's about becoming aware of the creativity that's always already there. Because one of the things that happened with sort of the mythologizing of creativity was this idea that creativity had to be something really super special. Creativity is like theory of relativity, the Mona Lisa, something extraordinary. What we're looking at now a lot more is everyday creativity. And that everyday creativity can also, in fact, very much be relational creativity. How do we interact? How do we relate to each other? And that, in fact, means that when we're together, we're sort of in an improvisational dance, right? Therapists are in an improvisational dance with their clients, right? Unless everything is all completely pre-scripted, we're making some of it up. And we have choices in terms of how we respond, and so what's happening then is that we're seeing really that we do have a lot more possibilities than we assume, because we are in this kind of a context that's not predetermined, that's not script. If there's a script, it's actually a script in our heads that says, this is what I'm going to have to say to this person because blah, blah, blah. We don't really have to say this. Everybody's, there's so-and-so again. Boring. We'll talk about the weather or something. But we can also say something more fun and provocative, right? To just kind of open things up a little bit. So, I want to talk about complexity and simplification. One of the reasons why I got into creativity initially was not because I was interested in creativity per se. It's because I was interested in authoritarianism, which at the time I was told is interesting, but of purely historical interest. Right? Yeah. Right. Oh boy. And I was interested in authoritarianism, and I had just come, I'd been living in London, and in London, the 70s was a pretty wild time. It was fantastic for music. It was also sadly fantastic for racism and prejudice, and things like that. And that repulsed me, as did the English weather and the English food in the 70s. And so I was eager to get out, and foolishly went to America thinking things would be better. All right. I'm still there. I love San Francisco. My wife is American, but yeah. And I'm about to tell you what's going on there right now. And so I became interested in authoritarianism and how do authoritarians think, how do they construct their reality? Like, how do you make sense of the world in such a way? And I saw something fascinating. This was a time of huge unemployment. All these kids that had nothing to do, they didn't have any money. The Sex Pistols, not necessarily my favorite band, but they did have one classic line There's no future in Elon's dreaming. Wow, that's a good line, and that was really the case. I mean, you see all these kids who really had no sense of what's going to happen to my life. It's just, holy shit. And I saw two things happening. I was playing in bands at the time, and I saw one musical direction where you had, some of you may remember the ska bands of the 70s and early 80s, Selector, Police, any number of them, Madness and so on, that were mostly black and white musicians together, and just by the fact that they were black and white, were drawing black and white audiences as sort of a celebration of diversity, right? And of course, in the music, and so I love that. But on the other hand, you could see these boys getting picked up by these nationalist, explicitly racist movements like the Bersheba and the National Front and so on. And what these people would do, they first of all didn't eat boys and sense right then. Now you belong to the boot, you're not alone, but, and we'll give you something to do. So what happened there was incredible amount of scapegoating on a certain group of immigrants. And this idea, this simplistic idea that that's the problem, right? The problem is these people that have come from Jamaica or India or whatever, and we have to get rid of them. Forget the fact that the British actually invited them, but the logic doesn't work there. And so what I became aware of and concerned by was a kind of thinking that in an effort to make sense of complexity, simplifies excessively, right? And so it's, if you will, reductionist. This is the answer. This is the group to blame, and it's polarizing. We're good. We're English. We wave the flag, and they're bad, right? So that being kind of central to the mindset there. Interestingly, when you think about what we're taught in science, it's pretty much the same, right? It's analysis. So you break everything down to its smallest part to understand how it works, right? Typically, we're not taught to look at the whole, which is, of course, my assistants think it does. It's becoming more important. And obviously, we're in creativity, we saw this paradox, this dialectic of concepts that are being brought together rather than split up, right? So I know that, in a world that's increasingly complex, there is a tendency to want to simplify, to want to find answers that are easy, that give us a sense of clarity, that's the sense that something can be fixed immediately, and take us straight into disaster, because these efforts at simplification eliminate so much of what is real and important, besides any ethical issues. Even just realistically speaking, there's so much that's left out, but it's appealing. It sells. If I'm on power, then I can use that kind of simplified thinking to attract people to me, even if my promises are really lies. I really don't think many Americans want to go back into coal mines now, for instance. But that's a promise. Right? So one of the things that I think we will need to work on in the near future is the ability to address these kind of complex issues, and also to have a kind of complex creativity. Right? One of the things that interests me is this sort of lack of any kind of visions of the future. I still think the Sex Pistols are right again. If we look at the future in the media, wherever we go, there's not a lot to be cheerful about, is there really? So one of the issues is that there's this pervasive sense of stuckness, right? One of the reasons I think why we're stuck is because we cannot create a new world with the same creativity and the same thinking that got us here. Now, there's a certain kind of thinking brought us here. There's what you call the scientific method, reductionism, and so on. And it's not amazing things, but it's not going to get us over the hurdle. The creativity of modernity had, if I could now simplify it, forgive me, the stories of the great geniuses, the vast majority of them were self-destructive, right? They cut their ears off, they drank themselves to death. So the creative geniuses destroyed their own bodies. In the same way, the genius of industry in the world is destroying the body of the cutter, right? So our creativity is decontextualized and is destroying its context, its environment. Bateson, classic quote, the organism that destroys its environment destroys itself, right? And that's one of the things people who are so against global warming bullshit, warming bullshit, blah, blah, blah. They don't understand that it's not something else there. Right. Hey, it's who we are too. We can't escape from it. We are the environment too. I'm your environment, you're mine, right? And so we need that more systemic kind of thinking there and a more systemic creativity. And what does that more systemic creativity look like? One of the things that we've done, as I pointed out, is for creativity not to be contextual. And in Taoism, they talk about creativity, and they talk about the ground, right? The supported ground for creativity. What we have done, in a way, is destroying the supported ground, right? And by creating factories, yes, we have created these amazing objects that we all want and so on, but would also pollute the hell out of countries. I lived in China for a little bit in the mid-'80s, and the economic progress has been incredible. People are still walking around in mouse suits, right? And maybe a little bit. I'm not. But now one of the big issues for China is pollution, because you can't have that incredible explosion of industry without pollution, and Chinese people are worried about their kids. If my kid goes in that water and comes out with blisters, and that's not a good thing. So how can we then develop a form of creativity that's also more contextual and more relational, And although my mother is an Italian, my father is Dutch, I am an Italian citizen. So as a nice Italian boy, I have to think of mama, right? So I thought, well, hey, the creativity in women. Who here knows about Rihanna Eisler? Oh, you haven't been Rihanna. Oh, you should know Rihanna Eisler. She's a lawyer. But she has written some very important books that I would highly recommend. Eisler, Rihanna. And she at one point told me, you should think about the creativity of women. And so the first thing that I did, naturally, is think about my mother. What did my mother do? Is it the case that my mother was not creative at all, right? My father wrote books and blah, blah, blah. But my mother didn't art or books or anything like that. But when I started thinking about what she did in my life and how she addressed all the issues that I, as a noisy, troublesome little boy, I was facing, going from one country to the rest, I thought, wow, this is really an amazing creativity. She made me feel safe, and she entertained me, and she would breathe for me, and all these kinds of things, right? But that's part of a world that is not recognized in the same way that Willens' work is not recognized in GNPs and so on. This is not recognized as being, quote, creative, And as on American politician recently put it, well, women have babies, but that's not an issue. That's just natural. So, there you go. Have more. And so I became really interested in that and seeing how there was this whole contextual dimension, and these contextual values, if you will, were submerged in favor of this onslaught of, quote, progress that was clearly becoming more and more self-destructive, right? I mean, we were cutting our ear off and drinking like crazy and shooting up and doing all these things. And that's just not so great. So that how do you begin to create this ground of support, this ground of being, if you will, that allows us to interact and to create in ways that are more generative, and also supports that move away from the attacking every new idea, but nurtures ideas and allows them to emerge and play with them for a little bit, because when you have a new idea and you're with some people, if you're with people like that are good people that know where it's at, if you will, they know it. You just play with it, and it may be crazy. You don't have to say, oh, that's stupid. Just like, oh, let's see where it takes us for a little while. Let's let a plant grow a little bit, right? Those kind of values too, and there are more systemic, more relational values, I think we definitely need to cultivate if we want to avoid sinking deeper and deeper into the trouble we're in now, if you will. So I hope like to maybe open things up a little bit, just for discussion, because that undoubtedly being my usual rambling and not entirely clear self. So would love to hear from you.
Maybe it's a good idea to just let people talk with each other, just 2 minutes, and then have a common discuss with you.
When is they going to decide to gang up on me then? No, so whatever you go.
So here's the talk to each other, and then a review microphones so that you can ask questions or comment and so on.
The plan now is to have some questions, answers, comments, and then after that, Alfonso will round up with some other issues as to happens. And we have Lena and Marcy who are, carrying out participates. So if you want to also do something, just raise your hand and they will. And Marcy. Where wants to start? Yeah. Where?
Bring perhaps.
In English.
In English. Yeah, we thought about what we said and tried to put it in a context of in like a social context working with different troubles. And we thought about this you said about simplifying and reducing. That happens all the time in these children's life. They're like fragmented, and then individual people have to take responsibility for themselves, often the kids and so they're fragmented in the school, in the social systems, in the psychiatry, and we don't think holistically about these things. We also talked about someone called Habermas, who you might know. It's a German social scientist who talks about the acceleration community, that because of this capitalistic mindset that we always have to maximize and increase output, it's a paradox, and it's just keep ruining ourselves and keep ruining the community and trying to tie these together. But we need a more holistic approach probably to how we do things, and thinking about children or ourselves as teams, as creativity and cooperation, instead of this very individualistic thing might be very helpful.
I think that's very important. In the U.S. now, there's an epidemic of loneliness.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody's lonely. We don't really create context for people to be together, and we create distrust among people. So that doesn't make for a happy society. And what you're talking about, so the capitalistic element of it, is that we're always pushed to productivity and to have specific hours to be this and that. I mean, when I was a kid, my parents would go, okay, like, see you in the evening.
Now I see where I
Was, straight. But now I see kids like their whole lives are so incredibly such disorder. Right? And it's so structured. Here's what we know from creativity research is that just having time to yourself, just daydreaming, just lying around a little bit, it may seem like we're just lazing around, but you're very likely to have ideas and thoughts come up when you're just being, just more relaxed and playing around rather than always focus or looking at TikTok or something, Because that's the other thing, like the constant distraction. So yeah, I agree. We are going in a direction that's just not healthy for us.
Okay, yeah. I've tried English, but I still think obviously. But none of the things we sometimes resistant and I read the article that was sent out, and I was just, what's the point? Get to the point. I don't know this. I thought I was stupid then. If I was fucking dead, but no. And then when I hear you speak, and I think of the scene i dag, the theme of today, by we want to understand things, but simple. I want to. So I got this feeling I had yesterday when I wrote the article, and when I was listening to you, I want to do it quickly. I wanted to get you to the point. And then I could feel when I was speaking with my colleague, that's the whole idea. You don't have to go there. You have to learn again and remember that that's not one simple answer. So I give myself not understanding because I was looking for something that I shouldn't look for. That didn't make sense now. Doesn't it make sense?
That's terrific. Thank you. But there's so much pressure for a quick fix. Everything is a quick fix today, right? Nobody thinks, one of the things I'm interested in is nobody thinks about the future. They think about, in business, the next quarter. The next quarter is only like 3 months away, That's not really, Native Americans think of 7 generations. All right, that's a different foundation for your thinking then. But yeah, we all want the quick fix, don't we? Yeah. But thank you for mentioning it and being aware of it. That's great.
This one. I work in daycare, so the youngest children. And in the introduction, we were told that don't think about children with special needs, got special invitations. And we have a lot of children with some very special invitations. And it's, of course, it's a challenge for us. And then you said something, or you said we can create another world with this thinking that had us here. So, what do we do? Because the thinking that got us here created the system that we work in and created the children. So now what?
Well,
That's the whole point of sort of thinking it's actually a relationship and relationally to has to redesign.
We have to redesign Danish daycare completely.
so the way
You know, when I look at education, when I look at how universities work and how organizations work, or really don't work, people aren't happy there, and they're not working well, and they're destroying the environment, and our education systems are not preparing kids for the reality of the world that they're facing. They're preparing kids for an industrial reality. And I know that it sounds sort of like, oh my God, you're talking about redesigning everything. It's a big deal, right? But we have to do it, even if only begin it gradually and becoming aware of what are the urgent, the crisis points that we're here. I mean, in the U.S., huge mental health crisis for young people, and that they should be happy going to the school where they just managed like a prison. I mean, it just makes no sense. At that point, they'll just blow it all up. It's great. But we do have different ways of thinking. We do in Alza. There's a lot of more consistent theory in designing education and so on. So it's there. And, I teach a small university. It's a private, not-profit, alternative university. You try different things. Right? And I think those kinds of things can be helpful because, you have these little, just like in China, they have people autonomous zones, where they're allowed to go capitalist a little bit. And clearly it worked. And so there have to be spaces for exploration where people would try different things and then you go, wow, look, it's working. Maybe we should take it off. Yeah, but I know what you mean. It's seeming overwhelming.
Can I just follow up on that, Alfonso? Because you talk about creativity as something relational, something contextual. You said about symptoms, symptoms. And is that also relational, contextual? And how come that we have this tendency to make sense of something that's inherently individual? And how can you create upper weights on Sundays?
I'm not being a medical man. I can say that I think the notion of a symptom rather as being strictly about the individual is something that comes out of clearly a certain tradition, which was reductions, right? And I think there seems to be plenty of evidence that there are a lot of contextual and collection issues having to do with systems, with symptoms, right? So, and in that area, I mean, you as systemic therapists are the people who understand how that shows up and when that happens, right?
You bring me the idea that even severe symptoms are generally just disabilities. It's serious. Just start talking about that with intent ideas. So many people, it's kind of a theoretical idea, but we actually came with the idea that, it's lives between us.
Yeah. But you see, that kind of way of thinking is not natural at this point, right? So people think autism is something that maybe you can cure with drugs provided by your friendly pharmaceutical company.
Your answer to that is to avoid reductionism.
Well, I mean, I think, actually, I had a doctoral student who, well, I was going to say is himself, but he has now transitioned and is herself autistic and had a very, very rough upbringing, but through any number of relational practices, including Aikido, is now professor at a university and publishing everything from academic books to articles to comic books, and is an incredibly creative person. So, and I can later give you the information about the dissertation. But yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that happens is that for clear financial interests, things get channeled in a certain direction, and anything that then seems to threaten that financial direction is not appreciated and in fact rejected, right?
What else?
It's allowing up. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I work at a school for children with special needs, and the students that for me are the systemic narrative approach and really good work. But it kind of struck me when you spoke about incomplexity, that when something is perceived or felt to be too complex, we tend to simplify things. And even though I think we do great work, I sometimes experience, I trust a transition to be a teacher, to be a leader of art school, of guilds, and we do still sometimes experience that if a teacher ever feels stressed or feel that it's difficult to deal with this group of children, they sometimes tend to simplify by making clear rules and strict structure for this and that. And you could always tell them that, this is not how we do things, but that would not be practicing what we preach. So how would you suggest that you open up dialogues for that inner reflection? Because you can't just transfer knowledge from my head into theirs. It has to be renegotiated continuity. Any ideas on that?
But so you're saying certain individuals don't necessarily know the sort of the culture in a way, right?
They do know it, but when they feel stressed or pressured, they tend to simplify things and, making overall strict rules about you have to do this, you have to do that, which may not reach the child's needs.
Yeah, I designed a leadership program and a master's degree, and the end product is a capstone project where they have to go out and do something in the world. And the students are, they learn all these wonderful things about leadership and different approaches, collaborative, participatory. But when things get stressful and they think it's going to spin out of control, suddenly they become ultra bosses, right? Because it is kind of a natural reaction to want to impose structure and order, something when you think it's getting out of control, right? And has maybe addressing that reality. Have you spoken to the person and suggested maybe alternative approaches to dealing with that?
Yeah. Yeah, we do, speak continuously throughout the year where we try to ask the questions that opens up for a reflection. But it's part of that is still new and upcoming, that culture. So do you have any suggestions to when we hold meetings, what could we speak out and in what way, or what could maybe help that inner reflection grow. So when we feel pressured, when we feel the complexity is too high, how do we remember not necessarily to go towards those simple answers and simplified pragmatism?
No, I mean, I think it's a fascinating question, and I'm certainly going to have a magic wand. My sense is that if you are individually, not just that person, talk about your own experience overly and how you dealt with it, so that it's not just that person sort of having to, that it becomes more of a general discourse that you all share stories, and even stories of where you did something that you later maybe regretted because you got a little too focused on that. I think that can bring somebody who's new in alert and make them feel less like I'm screwing up here, or right. And helping you support each other when something like that is happening. Oh. Is it okay to ask for somebody else to somehow assist you, however you would do that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, they're about.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for asking that first. Sorry for
Alfonso, I would like to ask you a question, because when people are asking these questions about redesigning, I think it's in the center of this conference. So you brought something very important into this redesign. In a way, when people in the room ask about the redesigning, could you please help us a little about redesigning, going beyond your own organization? Because in a way, it's like when you talk about daycare and children with special needs, special invitations, a lot of those kids, but in a way, as I see it, it's not an issue just for the daycare people. It's a much bigger issue. It's an issue between all the different contexts in the children's lives and so on. So, could you please help us about this word? I think it's a very important word. Is about redesigning.
Oh, I have to go huge backlog. Listen, this way could just point it out.
Where is it? There are multiple systems. If there are multiple systems,
And that makes the job even more complex, right? Because you have everything from parents, and you have this, and you have that. And so then the redesign process, there are obviously any number of approaches to design and redesign of any organization, any kind of system. And when you're dealing with multiple systems like you're talking about, I think maybe the initial step would be for the particular system that you're in to get some clarity about what it is that your preferred goal is. You know, I mean, one thing that probably all know people call ideal system design, right? So what you do is you start out with your ideal, you know, really not perfection, but what would be really good, right? And then you work backwards from there. And there's huge literature on this. You work backwards from that, because otherwise, there's a tendency to say, well, how about we do this? No, we can't do this. Okay, well, maybe we turn, oh, no, we can't do this, right? We just get sucked into all the various problem situations. But with ideal design, you forget either, and you say, what would our desired situation be, right? And then you work back from there and see what the obstacles on the way might be and how you could gradually eliminate them. And my suggestion would be to do that within the particular system that you're working in first, right? So all working on that together. And then see what are the various stakeholders. So who is relevant in this discussion? What are the other systems that you're working with, and how can you begin then to develop dialogues, explorations, and also make the idea of redesigned more alive? That you really demonstrate how the current system is, the one that is needed so much. It's suffering. Then what would a redesign look like? And what would they consider more of an ideal outcome? So, and again, it's different for every context. University or childcare or the context is different, but the basic ideas are pretty much the same in terms of how people work on these.
Hi.
How do you redesign? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe something else.
No, I like the one you said about this other system. And I wrote my question down because my English is not that great. So I imagine that the parents are a very important system for the children. They are the biggest mirror for the children in the beginning. So I think the children mirror a lot out in the schools and the kindergartens, what they learn from codes. And here in this country, we have a children and education minister that only think about the children as students. That's the way to talk about it. And we don't include the system of the parent. So could you maybe just comment a bit on how can we work on that, and how can we work on, because I also think you should see it in the mirror, but we have to think what happened to the children and not what's wrong. So, and it's like he all the time look what's wrong with the children, and it's the way he talks, and it also makes the teachers talk in that way because they're pressed. So I think, could you comment a bit on how do we make what is thinking work together around the child, and that the child we did that.
Thank you. Yes. Well, I'm so glad that you asked such easy questions for me. I mean, I think one of the points that you made here about what minister also has to do with what are a lot of the fundamental assumptions in the particular sort of universe that you're working in. And sadly, a lot of the assumptions have become very sort of productivity oriented, very dehumanizing. The focus is very quantitative. And that's a problem that's happening everywhere. Because when people have sort of numbers and this sort of techno language, they feel that they have more of a sense of control, but it's actually totally bullshit. Because they go, what they're really doing is dehumanizing kids and focusing on numbers at the expense of the reality of the experience of the kids and everybody else, right? So I think one of the things that has to happen, and I know this is not something that, it's not a quick fix, right? But those kinds of fundamental assumptions have to be challenged. That the student, you're just the student and not the parents and not this and not that, and that ultimately they're just a number and we have to get them through, and how much does it cost, and everything has become like that, and it's just not working. But there's the illusion, there's a bureaucratic illusion that it does work, right? Because they have numbers,
So I would say one of the things that would be necessary is to really address that and say, this is an alternative way of looking at this, because clearly what's happening now is not working. But the fundamental assumptions have to be challenged. Otherwise we're just repeating over and over and over and go, well, show me the numbers again. What's it look like for these numbers? It's like, you know what? Got to try something different here.
So I'm the structure, man. So 2 minutes.
Ask us probably time.
2 minutes. Yeah.
So thank you very much. I mean, I really appreciate the discussion. I'm sorry if I rambled a little bit. That's just as these guys have done that. This is just my style, sadly. But what you're dealing with is specific to your situation, and at the same time, I would say, it's universal. Yeah. So I love to be able to give you, some maybe not easy, but constructive, quick answers. But a lot needs to be done, because there's this whole wave of thinking that's become quite dominant, and it's probably here too, less by the pharmaceutical industry and so on, and like bureaucrats who want things nice and tidy. But it's clear that it's not working. Kids aren't happy, you're not happy, and something needs to be done. My suggestion would be put aside just a little bit of your time every week or whatever, like think through some of the major issues and the alternatives. Because one of the things that can happen is that we just throw up our hands and go, find some friends, go out for a drink, talk about this stuff, and frame it in the positive. No? Because guys come out, but let's frame it positive and see where we can take it, because you're a smart bunch, and I think you could do it. Yes.
Thank you, Alfonso, for this excellent start of the day, where you brought some very important issues to the discussion about also basic assumptions about redesign, about complexity, about creativity, and the combination between those issues. So thank you. This is also the kind of a creative present for Europe. That's just a small thing over the older.
And thank you both so much. It's such a pleasure to hang out with you and to be introduced to these wonderful people. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And now we'll have a break. Yeah, we will start again. Vi starter igen 5 minutter i, så kvarter. Vi er i pause nu. Og så, så kom tilbage til tiden.
Ja.